Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And I've often asserted just how important I think material items are for helping us to read the past. In that I'm talking about buildings, texts, paintings and also textiles. But can I prove that assertion? Well, I think I can, and today I'm going to try. Because I think that by looking at a small and comparatively overlooked material item, a little piece of textile, that we can gain insight into the personality of one of the most powerful and influential figures in the formative years of the Henrician regime. I'm talking about Thomas Wolsey. Let's go. Thomas Wolsey was born in 1470 or 1471. He was famously derided during his lifetime by those who were displeased by his elevation as the butcher's boy from Ipswich. From this, we get the idea, I think, that Wolsey came from nothing to one of the highest offices in the land as Henry VIII's friend, confidant and advisor. However, that somewhat simplifies matters in painting his life as a rags to riches tale. Certainly, Wolsey's background was markedly different from the majority of those who he would come to work and live alongside at court. However, evidently his family was in a financial position to allow him to attend school and university. There was someone on hand to pay for this. Equally, his family were in a position to allow him to go down this path, rather than setting him on a different journey where he could more rapidly become financially useful to them. For example, as another set of hands in the family business. As it was, Wolsey was able to make use of whatever advantages came his way. From Ipswich School, he would eventually end up studying at Magdalen College, Oxford. It seems he was a precocious intellect, and came to be known as the Boy Bachelor. He obtained his BA at just 15 in 1486. He remained at Oxford to get his MA, and also to fill the role of first junior and then senior bursar. He was made Master of Magdalen School, and in 1500 he was made the Dean of Divinity. Wolsey had previously been ordained as a priest on the 10th of March 1498. Many would no doubt consider Wolsey's position to be an excellent one. However, as we will soon find out, Wolsey was not done. The holding of more than one religious benefice or ecclesiastical office is known as pluralism, and it is a questionable undertaking in canon law. However, Wolsey wanted the benefits. On the 3rd of November 1501, he was successful in his application and was granted a papal bull or licence to do just that. His first position was the rectory of Lymington, obtained on the 10th of October 1500. The month after obtaining the papal bull, he was made vicar of Lydd in Kent. The living of Redgrave, Suffolk came in 1506, and then Great Torrington in Devon in 1511. Wolsey would strive higher still, and so he chose to enter the household of the Archbishop of Canterbury to act as a chaplain. From 1503 to 1507 he worked for the Treasurer of Calais, Sir Richard Namfon. Indeed, Namfon is credited with recommending Wolsey for royal service. He became a royal chaplain in the household of Henry VII. The king put him to work, and was clearly satisfied enough to see him rewarded with the role of Dean of Lincoln Cathedral in February 1509. However, Wolsey's patron would not be long-lived. Within months, on the 22nd of April 1509, the new king, Henry VIII, would ascend to the throne. Wolsey had clearly endeared himself here too, because in the November of that year, Henry VIII made Wolsey his almoner. As long as Wolsey had the love of the king, he was, to all intents and purposes, untouchable. And he was evidently very good at making himself irreplaceable to his royal master. Wolsey's gentleman usher and later biographer George Cavendish tells of his master's skill at keeping the boring work of kingship away from Henry VIII. He explains how Wolsey could be found, quote, putting the king in comfort, that he shall not need to spare any time of his pleasure for any business that should necessarily happen in the council, as long as he being there. All his endeavour was only to satisfy the king's mind, knowing right well that it was the very vain and right course to bring him to high promotion. He daily attended upon the king in the court, being in his especial grace and favour, who had then great suit made unto him, as counsellors most commonly have that be in favour, in whom the king conceived such a loving fantasy, especially for that he was most earnest and readiest among all the council to advance the king's only will and pleasure, without any respect to the case. The king therefore perceived him to be a meet instrument for the accomplishment of his devised will and pleasure, called him more near unto him, and esteemed him so highly that his estimation and favour put all other councillors out of their accustomed favour that they were in before. This account of Wolsey has the merit of being written by a contemporary of his, someone who knew him well. However, George Cavendish is also known to be a staunch supporter of Thomas Wolsey, and so we should probably assume that where he was able, he would be looking to sand down any of the rougher edges in his former master's reputation. Nevertheless, what I think this narrative shows is that Wolsey was able to clearly see what his employer wanted and how he could fill that role. Wonderful, right? Except, perhaps, when that employer is a young king, who wants to enjoy the perks but shirk the responsibility. What might the nobles around Henry think of both him and his servant if they saw, as the Venetian ambassador saw in 1519, that the king left, quote, everything in the charge of Cardinal Wolsey? As almoner, Wolsey proved himself to be a master of planning when supporting Henry and his troops during their battles in France, which included the famous Battle of the Spurs that took place on the 16th of August 1513. Apparently at this time, Wolsey's skill meant that the soldiers never ate so well nor slept so dry. Wolsey continued to accumulate ecclesiastical offices. He reached the height of Archbishop of York on the 5th of August 1514, and then the following year leapt still higher, being made a cardinal on the 10th of September 1515. In 1518, Wolsey was made papal legate, able to represent the Pope in England. At the same time, he was becoming more and more entrenched in both the Henrician government regime and the personal favour of the king. His work and skill was integral to the successful planning of that diplomatic set piece, the Field of Cloth of Gold, which occurred in 1520. All the while, he was still striving further, reaching higher. After the death of Pope Leo X in 1521, Wolsey, or at least people speaking on his behalf, were putting him forward as an ideal replacement. Despite his promotion and his evident favour with the king, Wolsey still had a number of allegations levelled against him, both during and after his lifetime. For example, he is commonly accused, even today, of acting as some sort of procurer or pimp in the apparent harem of Henry VIII's court. Evidence for this is presented in his intervention that prevented Anne Boleyn from marrying Henry Percy. The implication being that he did this in order to free Anne up to be Henry's mistress. However, this story is massively reliant on the notion of Henry as being far more promiscuous than the evidence supports. The Percy affair occurred in around 1523, when Henry was potentially romantically entangled with Anne's sister, Mary. Instead, Wolsey's intervention was most likely down to the large gap between the pair's social stations. Perhaps pressure was being applied to him, or he himself felt that Anne was overreaching. However, if this was Wolsey's motivation, then it is hypocrisy in the extreme, considering how far he had managed to leap up. Writing in 1542, so more than a decade after Wolsey's fall and death, Edward Hall asserted that Wolsey was, quote, double in both speech and meaning. He would promise much and perform little. He was vicious of body and gave the clergy evil example. Wolsey is often denounced as being a man of pronounced flaws, many of which would be unbecoming in a cardinal. In fact, he was arguably guilty of enacting a number of the 7 deadly sins. Despite the Roman Catholic requirement for clerical celibacy and the connected prohibition on priests marrying, Wolsey became a father on 2 occasions by his longtime mistress. Their relationship seems to have been a poorly guarded secret, hence an accusation of his lustfulness. The danger of Wolsey's wrath was also alleged. There were some among the upper echelons of the nobility that took umbrage that their, as they saw it, divinely intended place beside the monarch as advisers were being usurped by this upstart. Take the Duke of Buckingham, a man with royal blood in his veins, who might expect, by birth and bloodline, to be at his king's right hand. Privileged among advisers, but with Wolsey, that role had been filled. The great chain of being, God's divine order, had been subverted. There is a tale of the Duke of Buckingham waiting upon his king, with a basin and ewer of water so the king could wash his hands. Despite the Duke's high birth, this was a privilege, to serve the king in this way. But on one occasion, this was happening while Henry was in conversation with Wolsey. And Wolsey apparently felt his hands needed a wash as well, and so he took the opportunity. Now Buckingham felt he was being asked to serve Wolsey, and that would never do. Wolsey might be a prince of the church, but Buckingham, his birth was far higher. So the story goes, Buckingham, in a fit of pique, spills the water over Wolsey's shoes, embarrassing him in front of the king and members of the court. Wolsey does nothing, but apparently he doesn't forget. And he slowly works towards Buckingham's destruction. Eventually, according to some, Wolsey would be successful and would see to it that Buckingham was executed on Tower Hill in 1521. Which, if this is true, it seems like a massive overreaction for a bit of spilled water. In addition to his displeasure apparently threatening the nobility with death, Wolsey may have further irritated by his apparent inability to show deference to anyone but the king, and even then he may only have shown that to his face. Wolsey wore his education and intellect with pride, as well he might. But it seems he did more than that. It looks like he used it to outthink and embarrass those who were born above him, but apparently without his intellectual gifts. Wolsey was a show-off, and he would not reserve his skill at displaying magnificence for his king alone. Parts of Hampton Court Palace represent a great architectural legacy being left to us by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, specifically Base Court, the first court you enter when you come to Hampton Court and go through this marvellous gatehouse. Hampton Court Palace is built in red brick, which when Wolsey was constructing it was the most fashionable material of the day. The gatehouse itself today is spectacular, but in Wolsey's day it would have been even more so, being 2 stories higher. The gatehouse had to be lowered for safety in the 18th century. Passing underneath and through the gatehouse, you enter into Base Court. And in its shape and also in its ornamentation, Wolsey is following a manual, one from 1510, that was designed to tell you how to be a cardinal and how to build as one. When building your cardinal's palace, you are told that, quote, from the vestibule, an entrance leads into the courtyard, which should be arranged like a forum. It should be square in plan. In the courtyard, where all can see it, should be the deeds performed by emperors in a Christian manner. So far, so good. It seems that Wolsey is engaged in a kind of paint-by-numbers of building work. But he has gone one step further for the comfort of his guests. Because in his square forum, the rooms do not give directly out into the air. Rather, there is a covered walkway. While rooms giving out directly into the square forum may be fine in Italy, where the weather is pleasant, not so much in England. If you are wearing fine furs and velvets and silk, the last thing you want on your way to breakfast or dinner is to be rained on. And Wolsey has thought about this. For the deeds performed by emperors in a Christian manner, we need look no further than Meynnart's terracotta roundels. In Wolsey's day, these would have been painted and gilded, and they would have looked utterly fabulous. Indeed, all of the brickwork would have been painted. We can still see traces of the diaper work, but what you would have seen in Wolsey's day was the red brick painted red, the black diaperwork painted an even clearer colour of black, and even the cement in between the bricks painted white. In short, Hampton Court Palace would have been a visual feast, perhaps one that may even be a little bit too bright for our tastes. Were the works at Hampton Court Palace and his other home of York Place a sign of his pride, proof of his sin? Perhaps. However, Wolsey is a prince of the church, and he also sits at the heart of the Henrician government. It could be argued, therefore, that he best served his two masters, Henry and the Pope, by displaying magnificence. Is he, in fact, doing the expected, just with incredible style? If we do choose to read these houses as evidence of Wolsey's sin of pride, then it doesn't stop there, because arguably he displayed his pride on his person too. George Cavendish tells us how Wolsey would comport himself when away from home, quote, apparelled all in red in the habit of a cardinal, which was either of fine scarlet, or else of crimson satin, taffeta, damask, or kaffa, the best that he could get for money. We are told that Wolsey would parade around clutching a hollowed-out orange, stuffed with a vinegar sponge as a pomander against miasma. This also acts as a display of wealth, because it requires the use of the expensive orange. Perhaps his conspicuous consumption in this way may also be placed under the heading of the sin of greed. However, his targeted attempts to obtain a collection of benefices from which his profile and profit would increase could, and perhaps should, also more properly come under that banner. Gaining the Archbishopric of York was quite the promotion. The only higher church office was that of Canterbury. But Wolsey didn't seem to have much interest in actually doing the job. Indeed, he only went to Yorkshire for the first time once he had fallen from favour. In this, he is the poster boy for the problem of pluralism. Wolsey's distractions at court and from his other benefices led to his seat in York, this powerful seat, being physically unattended for 15 years. In the meantime, Wolsey lived well, spending his ever-accumulating wealth on his own pomp and magnificence. He augments his residences of York Place and Hampton Court to be some of the finest buildings in the land, if not in Europe. He purchased plate and jewels. He bought fine cloths and tapestries. The Venetian ambassador, writing about what he experienced when he visited Wolsey's Hampton Court, explained that, quote, one has to traverse 8 rooms before one reaches his audience chamber, and they are all hung with tapestry, which is changed every week. During his lifetime, Wolsey amassed an extraordinary amount of goods, including more than 600 tapestries, each one being incredibly expensive. This number of tapestries was around 10 times the amount that was owned by the richest members of the nobility at the same time. Indeed, only Henry VIII owned more. In thinking of tapestries, I am brought back to what I was talking about at the start of this video, the way that material objects can help us to read the past. Because I believe that this tapestry fragment might offer insight into the kind of man Wolsey was. It is one of a group of tapestry fragments that are today held by the Royal Collection. However, it is logical to me that originally it was part of Wolsey's own collection. It's on display at Hampton Court, but if you don't know to look for it, it's really easy to miss. In fact, it's only because a friend pointed it out to me that I even saw it in the first place. It's in the Great Watching Chamber, above the door to the corridor that heads towards the Royal Chapel. Currently, Hampton Court is closed, and there's a lot of travel restrictions in place for all of us. But when we open up, when the world opens up, and when Hampton Court can reopen its doors, perhaps this might be a fun activity for you to go in search of this piece of tapestry. Because I think this is a really exciting piece that is worthy of far more attention than it gets. In this fragment, Wolsey is presenting facts alongside ambitions in these embroidered arms. We see angels holding Wolsey's cardinal's hat above a shield. The right half of that shield is for the Archbishopric of York, which is also shown in the carving that sits below the great astronomical clock in Clock Court. In this tapestry piece, however, the arms of the shield are impaled with those of Canterbury. It would appear that Wolsey was expecting to mourn a colleague and then celebrate another personal promotion. The position of Archbishop of Canterbury represented, and still represents, the highest ecclesiastical office in the land. William Warham was appointed to the role in 1503, when he was already in his 50s. It seems that Wolsey was hopeful that he would not live much longer. And he clearly hoped, even expected, that he would be the natural choice to succeed him. Wolsey has been preemptive here. It looks very much like he has paid somebody to embroider what was at this time only an aspiration, but one that he had enough hope in that he thought it would be realised. Wolsey, I think, expected that he would be able to hold the two most prominent ecclesiastical appointments for himself. As it was, the aged Warham would outlive Wolsey by 2 years. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey had enjoyed incredible wealth, authority and position. He had moved in circles that his birth should have prohibited. While there, he had carried himself as the equal, if not the superior, of those around him. Henry VIII's favour had raised him to be recognised by the Pope and made into a prince of the Church. Unfortunately for Wolsey, he would find that the Pope's protection was hard to make use of at a distance, and that Henry's love could not be called unconditional. Wolsey eventually wrote a cheque he would not be able to cash, when he failed to get Henry VIII his annulment from Catherine of Aragon. Almost at once, Henry withdrew both his favour and his protection. Throughout his career, Wolsey had amassed enemies and committed transgressions of varying degrees of severity, but it looked like now they may have combined, and potentially could be the death of him. On the 4th of November 1530, Henry Percy, who was by then 6th Earl of Northumberland, but may be better known as Anne Boleyn's former suitor, had arrived at York to take Wolsey into custody. He was being arrested on a charge of treason for allegedly entering into talks with foreign powers in secret that were aimed at securing his own place and damaging the king's own purposes. It was decided that Wolsey should be taken to London to face the consequences of betraying his king. While travelling back to London, Wolsey's health declined rapidly. Understandable abject terror appears to have given way to dysentery. Wolsey managed to escape the executioner by dying en route at Leicester on the 29th of November 1530. As is so often the case, I'm left with questions. Principal among them, I think, is why does Wolsey fall? Is it something that could have been avoided? Was there a crossroads, a fork in the road, if you will, where if Wolsey had acted in a different way, taken a different course, then things may have turned out better for him? Or was his fall caused by something more innate, within him? A quirk or flaw that if he had been able to remedy it, he might have been protected. Perhaps if he had shown more deference to those around him. I also wonder if, thinking about this, if you agree with me about the value of that piece of tapestry. Because I stand by the fact that it might be small, but it provides a really vital key, a way in to the internal world of the man that was Wolsey, that we get a glimpse of his psychology, what motivates him. Therefore, we can perhaps start to extrapolate why he makes some of the choices he makes, and ultimately, what might contribute to his downfall. But what do you think? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversation in the comments section underneath this video. Or you can come and find me over on my social media. I'll leave links to my Instagram and Twitter in the description box. Follow me there and we can continue this conversation. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please also subscribe to this channel. And while you're there, hit the notification bell beside the subscribe button so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.